feel like whenever a band announces their breakup, people always wonder whether they'll stick to their word or whether they'll get back together down the road. Probably the most infamous one that comes to my mind was when Motley Crue announced their breakup and signed that ridiculous contract in 2014 saying they'd never reunite, and then years later they did that massive stadium tour and reneged on their promise. In today's video, we're going to take a look at why R.E.M. stopped touring and making music together. In the run-up to them announcing their breakup, there were warning signs of what was to come. Hailing from Athens, Georgia, R.E.M. would be together for nearly 3 decades and sell a whopping 80 million albums. It's a pretty massive accomplishment for 4 college dropouts who would play together for the first time at a drunken party, and then they would later go on to become one of the most influential rock acts in history. R.E.M. would explode in the 90s with their 1-2 punch of 1991's Out of Time and the following year's Automatic for the People, both of which went 4 times platinum stateside. They were all over MTV and on rock radio. I mean, they're still played a lot on rock radio today. If you listen to Sirius XM, I hear their music constantly on Lithium or 90s on 9. In 2007, R.E.M. would be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and in 2007, Stipe would tell Rolling Stone, "Looking back at the band's career thus far, we didn't set out for this to be a career, we just knew it was something we wanted to do, and we would stop when we didn't want to do it anymore." The band's original lineup would stay intact until 1997 when drummer Bill Berry left the group. 2 years prior, he had collapsed on stage, suffering a brain aneurysm, and he would announce his intention to leave the band, not wanting to tour or be part of a group anymore, telling the interviewer, "I didn't wake up one day and decide I just can't stand these guys anymore or anything. I feel like I'm ready for a life change. I'm still young enough that I can do something else." He would become a farmer and has had some sporadic returns to music over the years. R.E.M. had stated previously they would call it a day if any of the 4 original members quit, but they were still under contract with Warner Brothers at the time, and Berry urged the group to soldier on after he left. But unbeknownst to the public and their longtime fans, the 3 founding members of R.E.M. would perform together publicly for the final time in Mexico City in late 2008. R.E.M. were promoting their 14th album, 2008's Accelerate, with Stipe telling Salon.com, "On our last tour, 2008, during that we were kind of going, well, where could we go from here? We could tell we were on an upswing. It was important to us that we didn't whimper out with our tails between our legs. We wanted to feel we were at the peak of our powers, and the tour felt like that." Fast forward to May of 2009, and R.E.M. minus Michael Stipe would head to Portland with producer Jack Knife Lee to record some tracks at Jackpot Recording Studio. Guitarist Peter Buck's girlfriend lived in Portland at the time. A handful of instrumentals, including All the Best, That Someone Is You, and It Happened Today, would make it onto R.E.M.'s subsequent and final album. But the record would feature many starts and stops, as the members had other commitments within and outside of music. They also spent a fair bit of time searching for the right studios to finish off the album. They would eventually spend a good deal of time in both New Orleans and Berlin, Germany, wrapping up the record, titled Collapse Into Now. In a sign that R.E.M. was perhaps wrapping things up, they invited a lot of their friends to appear on the record while they were in Berlin, including Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder. They would play their final show together for a group of friends in the recording studio in Berlin, doing a number of cuts off their new album. Released in March of 2011, Collapse Into Now would represent the last album in a 5-album deal R.E.M. had with Warner Brothers. The album would peak at number 5 in the US, but no tour would be announced. R.E.M. likely would not have had any issues getting a new contract, given that they were still a huge act, despite changing trends and economics in the recording industry. Now granted, they would never nab the amount of money they got from their last contract, which they signed in 1996, which gave them $80 million, which at the time was the most paid to any band in music history. It was now 2011, and bands who were once selling truckloads of records were leaving major labels, and in some cases like Radiohead or 9 Inch Nails, they were giving away their albums for free or releasing records on independent labels. Record sales paled in comparison to what bands used to sell even just a decade ago, and if you were a band who opted to stay on a major label, you'd be negotiating deals where they got a cut of everything down to merch sales, or as they're known as 360 deals. R.E.M., a band who've always done things their own way and on their own terms, decided it was time to call it a day. The band wanted their swan song to be more varied than their past efforts and leave fans with a fantastic album, which they did. R.E.M's final album would mark the first time in nearly a decade the band made it on many best of lists for the year. 6 months after Crash Into Now was released, fans were shocked to learn that the band announced they were finished, releasing a statement in late 2011 that read, "As lifelong friends and co-conspirators, we have decided to call it a day as a band. We walk away with a great sense of gratitude, of finality, and of astonishment at all we've accomplished. But why? Why end a band after more than 3 decades of unbelievable success and music experimentation, they would ask. The time just feels right." R.E.M would add that there was no animosity between the members or ugly legal battles behind the scenes, and that everything was done amicably. Michael Stipe would talk to Salon.com and revealed that since the band's last tour in 2008, they were already slowing things down a bit. But 5 years later, in 2016, guitarist Peter Buck would give an interview to Rolling Stone talking about the band's time together and the breakup, stating, "I'm really proud of the fact that R.E.M ended in 2011 with the ideals we started with in 1980. I'm really proud of the body of work. There are a couple of records that aren't great, but there's a couple of Bob Dylan records that aren't great." Buck would go on to state that the band never really broke up because the members still deal with one another. They own buildings, they own their own master recordings, and have publishing companies and other band business they still deal with. Buck would reveal in the same interview that the members just grew jaded with being on a major label and all the commitments that came with it after nearly 3 decades in the business. I mean, the headline of his interview with Rolling Stone was, "I hate the business." One doesn't need to look much further from the fact that the former members are still active musically in one form or another. As for the decision to call it quits, Buck would tell Rolling Stone how the band decided to call it a day, with him recalling what Michael Stipe said to him in 2008. "I think you guys will understand, I need to be away from this for a long time." Buck would reply, "How about forever?" And bassist Mike Mills chimed in, "Sounds right to me." Talk about a clean breakup. To mark the occasion, Buck would compile a 5-page list of everything he hated about the music business, and he would tell Rolling Stone he hated, and I quote, "everything except writing songs, playing songs, and recording them. It was the money, the politics, having to meet new people 24 hours a day, not being in charge of my own decisions." As for whether we'd ever see a reunion, Buck was adamant in his 2016 interview that that was unlikely to happen, saying, "We could probably put out an album of stuff that we thought was too mediocre to be on the original records. Why would we do that?" he'd ask. Around the time of the 10th anniversary of the band announcing their split, Stipe would claim that nothing's changed. So what have the members been up to since their breakup? Well, Stipe has been involved in acting, appearing in movies and television in addition to the visual arts, and he's released several photography books and several new songs. Mills and Buck, meanwhile, have played in other bands, and there's been mini reunions, and it's obvious that the members still enjoy one another's company. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the link down below. And we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.